the U.S. is quick to label the refugees of Ukraine as refugees, right? But that would never be the same case, and will not be, and has not been the same case for people who are immigrating in the States from places like Haiti, where there is a very real political instability caused by the U.S. And it just goes to show you that they roll out the red carpet for certain immigrants.
Welcome to Fight Back Radio, a production of fightbacknews.org, taking you to the heart of the people's struggle. And today we're going to talk about immigration, which is, there may be no more important issue than that because of the election of Donald Trump, who will take office January 20th. So we have a perfect guest for this discussion, in my view, is Marisol Marquez, who's the member of the Centro CSO, our community service organization in Los Angeles, and is a leader of that organization and serves as the immigration co-chair. And she's also the co-chair of the Legalization for All, which is a national network, and we'll dig into a little bit to both of those things as in this episode. But particularly, Trump was elected president in part and made no qualms about his view that he was going to attack and go to war with the immigrant population of the United States. So anyways, welcome to Fight Back Radio, Sol. How you doing?
Hi, I'm doing great. Thank you so much, Richard, for having me and for doing this interview with us.
Yes. For those of you watching on YouTube, you can see Marisol has her daughter with her, and so besides all those being the activist I just said, she's also a mother and juggles quite a bit. But let's start out with Donald Trump and his election. It's you live in Los Angeles. And in an immigrant and Latino community. Could you talk a little bit about what the reaction to Trump's presidency and him getting elected president was? This isn't new; it's the second time this has happened. But how have people in Boyle Heights actually reacted to this?
So, people were clearly not happy, right? They were very upset. But I think it wasn't as upsetting to a lot of our folks here as it was in 2016, right? When he was voted in as the elect then, right? Or during the January 6th inauguration protests, right? That we saw in 2017. So I do think that, people are rightfully upset, but I don't think that's at the same caliber that it was during his first term. People in CSO have family members that are undocumented or at risk of having their, DACA or like a temporary status like TPS and other protections. They're at risk of those being removed, and so they are rightfully upset.
Yeah. No, it seems to me that some people are less worried because we survived or at least most of us did, survived 4 years of Donald Trump, with pandemic and everything else. Some of us didn't, but it seems also that, to me, he spent 4 years thinking about January 20th and how to attack immigrants in particular. And in terms of, he's talked about using the military, and he thinks he's going to have more success at some things we were able to beat him back through the courts or other ways. The last time. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. And this is like to say that things are still able to be combated, right, Richard? Is that what we're probably anticipating? I would say, yeah. I would say that, everything isn't lost, or there's going to be multiple attacks that he's going to try to put through, right? But people rise up, and that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today and find out different ways that we can do that.
Well, let's dig into that a little bit. In Los Angeles, the Centro CSO What types of things have you started doing since November 6th when Trump declared victory in the election?
Yeah, so we're very fortunate in CSO. There's people whose personal jobs are around immigration, and so a couple of people put together an Know Your Rights training, and it already happened. It was one of the first things that happened after November 6th, after the elections, and so a lot of people participated. A lot of people wanted to find out if they had any rights, and the truth is that yes, you do. You know, if Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement or any official comes to your door wanting to come in and starts questioning you about finding a person inside your house, they don't have a right to do that. They need a warrant. They need to have some signed and correctly dated document that says that they are supposed to be entering your home. And so, it was very successful, and it seems to be a thing that is going to be happening more so now that Trump is going to be elected within CSO. We're also participating in different actions around the country that affect the undocumented or people with temporary status in a lot of different ways and largely around the country. So those are just a few of the things that we've been up to.
Could you speak to that a little bit about what you're doing around the country? Is this a similar kind of know your rights kind of trainings that we're doing, or?
Yeah. Yeah, so CSO actually belongs to a larger network of organizations around the country called Legalization for All. And it's been around since 2012, so it's not new. And some of the things that we do are call-in days to the White House. Actually, that's happening right now. Today is the 18th of December, and it's going to end on the 20th of December, this Friday. But basically, it's a call to Biden to hopefully extend what is temporary protected status, TPS, for 18 months, because he is able to do that before his term ends. And TPS, unfortunately, is one of those protective statuses that Trump would have to sign for in order for it to be extended. And so we have a feeling that he won't even lift up a pen for that. And so we are urging Biden to do what he can in order to extend that for another 18 months so that people are able to plan a little bit better instead of having it immediately removed under Trump.
Okay, so let me. Well, for our Fight Back Radio listeners, this episode will be released after the 20th, but I want to encourage people to look to Legalization for All and CSO for calls like this to protect immigrants and immigrant rights, and we'll put the contact information in the show notes so people can do that. But I want to go back to this temporary protective status and. If clearly, if we want to extend it for 18 months because it protects people's rights, but even after 18 months, Trump, if he doesn't, and it's likely he won't extend it at that point. What kind of protection does this actually give to people that they don't, that they wouldn't have without it?
Yes, TPS is actually very helpful. It's normally around the same amount of time that DACA is, which is for 2 years. So essentially, it would be more like 1.5 because you still have to start the reapplication process within about a year and a half. But it applies to 17 countries in general. And there are three that in particular Legalization for All is focusing on, which are from Honduras, from El Salvador, and also from the country of Haiti. So all three of these to us, we think that those are the three that are very much at risk of being removed by Trump. And the reason that folks came over from Honduras, it applied to them during Hurricane Mitch. El Salvador, that was a series of earthquakes that happened in 2001. And from Haiti, there was a lot of destabilization at the hands of the US. And so people sought political asylum in regards to that. And so, TPS is great because it makes it so that you're no longer at risk of being deported. You can work and you can start a process of having a history within the government, knowing that you're contributing to things like retirement, so that if one day you were to become a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident, that would apply and that would be counted for you.
Oh,
So yeah.
okay, no, that's good. And so let me also, you mentioned DACA as well. Let me talk about that a minute too. So DACA is well, let me ask you what that is. I mean, it's been in the press for quite a while, and but it gives a status to people that were who grew up here but that were born in another country. Could you talk a little bit about what that has meant and some of a little bit of the history of DACA and where that's at right now?
Yes, yes. So DACA actually was an executive order that was signed by President Obama during his second term, right? So he was up for re-election in 2012, and so in June he of that year he decided to basically do something for the Dreamers, is what we call them, folks who are younger and advocate for a Dream Act, and so we typically call those folks Dreamers, or they call themselves that. And so DACA, which is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, was something that was implemented during, it was actually put into effect in June of 2013, but it made it so that folks who had entered the US at a particular time, which was at a youthful time, because they would have had to be a certain age when they were brought here to the US, that it would apply to them. It's actually pretty difficult to get DACA. You have to have a pretty good status within the law. You have to have some kind of history proving that you, in fact, were enrolled in school, and that you have been pretty active in keeping employment since you arrived in the States. It does apply to about 1,500,000 people, but not everybody is able to afford the very expensive application process. And so currently, I believe it's a lot less. I think it's 600,000 people who currently do have it instated and do use it. But hopefully that clears up what DACA is.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, because it's bantered around a lot, and it's good to get that kind of explanation. We appreciate that. So, but let's talk a little more about. I want to ask you about sanctuary cities, and Chicago, where I am, is one of them. And Los Angeles is as well, and Trump's named a new quote border czar. The former ICE leader Tom Homan has talked about going after these sanctuary cities. It's been in the press that Trump wants to punish. Usually these are cities that vote Democratic or in states that are Democratic, and that the idea is to challenge their federal funds, and if they don't cooperate with deportation. Could you talk a little bit about that? And also, let me mention this too. I mean, Trump has talked about using the United States military or National Guard, which is often controlled by governors, to be involved in the deportations. There seems to be all kinds of it's confusing to me, at least, how all this could potentially work. So I don't know what Mr. Homan or President Trump are talking about, but could you try to clarify a little bit about what might be happening in cities like Chicago or Los Angeles and other places in the country too, for that matter?
You bring up a lot of really important things in what you just said, Richard. And so let's just with a very small tidbit. Homan actually was, as you said, the ICE guy, right? But he started off under Obama, actually. And a lot of folks that do immigrants' rights work, we actually called President Obama back in the day the deporter in chief. That was during a lot of the actions that led up to winning DACA for folks. The youth were really calling him the deporter in chief and staging amazing protests around the country that were direct actions where they would, chain themselves to ladders, chain their arms together, refusing to be removed unless Obama took action and did something immediately. And so I just wanted to make sure that that point was emphasized, that it wasn't just something that Obama just whipped up magically and made happen. These dreamers, these youth, undocumented youth really made it happen. But yeah, so we got Homan and Trump uniting forces to make sure that they come after, sanctuary cities and sanctuary states and so forth. And so what's happening in LA and also in Chicago, where you are, Richard, is that a lot of these places that have been for a while now established as sanctuary cities are just re-upping it and making sure that it's official again, because it hasn't, once it was established, it wasn't something that was at risk. And so in LA, it's already being passed. I'm sure it's going to happen where you are too. And like you said, it's basically a sanctuary city is a city that whose government is not going to cooperate with federal enforcement of immigration. And so we think that that's a very positive thing, especially if Trump and Homan are vowing to come after families and in promising to keep them together, deporting whole families together, which is something that Homan has promised, which is atrocious, right? And I did also want to say that what you also said in regards to governors being able to use and deploy their National Guard, that's something that we're seeing in Texas, right? With Governor Abbott. He's used the Texas National Guard in order to militarize the very small and very precious city and town of Eagle Pass, right, which is right at the U.S.-Mexico border. And it's a very particular location where the Rio Grande is used as a way to make sure that immigration is happening on the water, which is something that is federally unable to be done. It's illegal. And so the National Guard of Texas has taken over one of the only parks that they have in Eagle Pass, has set up a permanent facility already, like an actually constructed site where they're now, starting to do deportation proceedings at this building. And so, yeah, we're tackling quite a bit of things within the Legalization for All network. And, our folks, a mini delegation of people traveled to Eagle Pass in order to see those particular conditions.
Yeah, and we had Javi on Fight Back Radio, and so I would encourage our Fight Back Radio listeners to go back and listen to that and check out that particular episode. Sanctuary cities and states that I know, the different mayors have reacted different to this. I'm actually proud of our mayor here in Chicago, Brandon Johnson, who comes from our movement, was a member of the Chicago Teachers Union, who has said absolutely that they're not going to cooperate with ICE or any other deportation efforts, and that the city of Chicago, it stands strong as a sanctuary city. And he's taken a lot of heat, quite frankly, for that as well from the rich people in Chicago who want to play things differently. But it was in the papers here. The Tom Homan actually came to Chicago and said some nasty things, even used nasty language about the mayor. But he said there's like $17.3 billion in the Chicago budget, and 20% of that is the revenues is federal. And so that's a lot of money that they could potentially hit at. And Trump has been, he's been doing this with tariffs. You saw the Prime Minister of Canada fly to meet with him at Mar-a-Lago, and the new president of Mexico made a call. And so this has also happened with the mayor of New York City, Eric Adams, who's trying to make deals to make sure that his federal money keeps going and potentially selling out some immigrants or all immigrants or whatever. What are your thoughts on that, and how do progressive people deal with that kind of whatever that kind of thing that's going on city by city or state by state?
That's a really good point that you bring up, Richard. I don't think it's in the city's best interest to be cooperating with immigration, like federal agents, right? It is extremely expensive, and actually it's a waste of resources, because a lot of these folks, like in violating like an immigration, coming over in an undocumented way is a misdemeanor, right? And it's like, it's not as horrible as committing a very violent crime, right? Or a very a large amount of a robbery, for example. And so it would be a really nice thing for people not to be cooperating. And so, folks in New York, folks in Chicago taking that stance is a positive thing. We do stand in a very much more positive light if we just left people alone and let them continue to live their lives with their families wherever they are, right? And LA, for example, in California is one of the sanctuary cities, but there's others too. There's Anaheim, Berkeley, Sacramento, San Jose. And it's all of these like cities and towns where people who are undocumented are living, are working. And that's across the board. There's over we think it's closer to 12 million people who are undocumented. They have families. My parents were undocumented for a long time, and my parents were definitely having families back then. And they work, they're here to work. They're not here to do something that's, like I would say CEOs are doing around the country. They're doing much more positive things for our communities.
Yeah, no, well, yes, they're productive. They're productive people, and they pay taxes. They do all the things that people, that people that have papers do. They're no different. We're all human beings, I think. I wanted to talk a little bit about sanctuary a little more too, because I know there was I had an experience here in Chicago as negotiating contracts for the Chicago Teachers Union in the Charter Division, where there was an incident actually in Los Angeles where a father was dropping off his children at school, and he didn't have papers, and he was abducted and eventually deported, and right in front of his kids, and so that led to the American Federation of Teachers developing a campaign about that. This is a number of years ago, but we negotiated based on that here in Chicago, and then it spread to other cities around the country. Sanctuary language, where in our collective bargaining agreement, in our union contract, so that the employer would not cooperate with ICE and with others, and would not allow them in the building unless they had warrants where they had to, or whatever, so that it wasn't just like we're going to help deport the parents of our students, of the children that we teach. But this is also possible. I think in other places. The workplaces, I think, are the easiest places for ICE and the federal government just to raid and round people up and and deport them relatively quickly sometimes. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, if you have a union, which many of these places don't, but if you do have a union, you can prevent some of that through your collective bargaining agreement, and that your employer does not have to cooperate unless there's actual, there's a federal warrant for that. And often, I haven't found too many employers that are going to show courage to protect their workers, to protect their own butt, yes, but not their workers. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about workplace raids and how we could potentially protect people, maybe sanctuary language in contracts or other things that could be done to from the movement or for people, individuals themselves, to protect themselves.
Yes, there's that. That's a very good point, Richard. And we unfortunately did see some workplace raids in the first administration of Trump. I remember one of them in particular went pretty viral for us. I forget what kind of particular factory it was, but we did see folks standing outside and being rounded up. We do think that is a likelihood again under Trump. But we also are trying to prepare folks with what to do if that is to happen. And so we've issued some statements on behalf of Legalization for All. We also know that there's a lot of misinformation that goes out there. And, people might be scared. They might think that there's a vehicle that just shows up at someone's workplace, and then they'll say, oh, they're here, right? And then it's not verified, and then we spread misinformation on accident, right? So we want to prevent that. Employers can they can refuse to cooperate with federal agents. And that's another thing that folks can do locally if your workplace is one that is employing a lot of folks who are undocumented, standing on their side and staging some kind of event or an action that makes it so that you can demand that your employer doesn't do that, doesn't cooperate with ICE. They can do that. I know that for a lot of like farm workers, which is some of my background, there were a lot of workplaces that did protect people who were undocumented, and because a lot of like the folks who do work are undocumented, and so the employer would also benefit from not having their employees be removed forcibly by immigration, right? And so there are actually unions also in the fields. The United Farm Worker folks, for example, are some of those who are unionized and are really good at protecting the undocumented. But yeah, I do think that there are different ways that you can push your employer to make sure that they stand on your side, because it is in their best interest to keep you as well. Especially if you've been there for a long time and they have that rapport with you. But yeah, unfortunately, we would want the other local elected people who are able to also make sure that your city is a sanctuary one. We would want to push them to do that so that then their jurisdiction would be covered and protected.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's good. I wanted to ask you also a little bit about the racism that's involved in the implementation of the immigrants, whatever deportations, immigrant rights stuff. There's very just lies and racist hyperbole that's been going on out there about who it is and who it isn't that's who are immigrants, why they're here, things like that. But going back to Tom Homan, Trump's borders are, he said, well, we're going to go after the criminals first. And he really doesn't define who that is very much. And, there's been some discussion about, drugs that come through Mexico. I mean, actually, cocaine and some of those things are not, grown in Mexico, but sometimes it's trafficked through there. Could you talk a little bit about crime and immigration and immigrant rights, and how and which also has a racist character to it?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a misconception, right, that a lot of the folks who are here undocumented are out doing some horrible things, right? They're unchecked. There's no paper trail on them, so they're doing all this and all that. That's actually a very, very minor amount of people who do that. Again, it's a misdemeanor to come over undocumented or to overstay a visa. It's not some grand felony or other charge, right, that folks are accumulating in different ways around the country. But it is of their best interest, and this is something that is commonly known with the undocumented to live a life free of crime. Because if you're trying to apply for things like DACA, TPS, or even like lawful permanent residency or citizenship, you need to have a clean record in order to even be accepted, in order for your application to be accepted. So a lot of these folks remain extremely lawful. And which is ironic because a lot of the time, these folks know more about, I would say, the law than a lot of regular people do, right? And so I do think it's just, fear mongering on Homan's part or other people who sympathize with people like that, that the undocumented are living this very lawless and crime-filled life. He also said that, people were eating pets, animals, right? That's something that Trump said of Haitian immigrants, which is extremely racist. That's not happening, And again, the Haitian immigrants in particular are the ones that are leaving Haiti after the destabilization at the hands of the U.S. and after so much, colonization has happened to their country. And so, it's unfortunate because we have the U.S. committing crimes and in the countries where people are coming from, and then once they're here, it's not like it's a bastion or a beacon of hope for these folks. They're treated in a very racist manner, isolated by government officials, and then U.S. citizens are being told that they're the ones committing crimes when in reality they're not.
Yeah, yeah, no. I mean, it was the Haitian thing. I remember, of course, was part of the debate that Trump said that very racist and obnoxious statement about people eating animals. But the there was some research done into that because he made that statement. And in fact, all or the overwhelming majority of the Haitians in Columbus, Ohio, which is where he said that was happening, or not Columbus, I think it was Springfield, Ohio. But were there legally because they had gotten temporary work visas and were actually recruited by a large corporation that wanted cheap labor, basically. And so the people were there, working very hard for low wages and trying to get by, and then you get that kind of thing. Um,
May I
there's
say
a
something else,
Sure,
Richard?
please, yeah, please do.
There's a particular case that happened. I believe it was in the summer of this year that was just horrific. So, and this just goes to show you like what the undocumented are doing in large amounts in this country versus others who are U.S. citizens and are actually the folks who are committing some of these crimes that fear mongers or racists like Holman and Trump are out there claiming that they are. So I think it was two undocumented buses, right? So this is what happens if you're here on a temporary work visa, especially in places like the South, right, where there's a lot of fields, a lot of crop fields. So in the early hours of the morning in Florida, there were two buses that were carting around undocumented farm workers. And so there was actually, I think it was around 5 o'clock in the morning, and it was sometime during the week. So it was a school day, and there was actually someone who was very, very intoxicated. He was drunk driving, and so he crashed into this undocumented bus, the school bus that was carting around the undocumented, and it made the bus veer off of the highway and crashed into a field, and it just devastated the bus. Right, a lot of people died, and it just brought up the discussion about how completely violently a lot of people who are undocumented are treated in this country. The owners of the farms and the owners of the buses and the drivers of the buses had never had any issues. The bus drivers themselves had never been intoxicated, had never even had a car accident or a ticket. And yet here's this other random person. He was a white man who was, a U.S. citizen, was intoxicated and crashed into this field worker bus. And it brought this conversation really at the front and center of how, farm owners, folks who employ the undocumented, really came out to say that, this was a horrible crime. He was charged with multiple murders, I believe like 19 of them, and is facing the rest of his life in prison, But I want folks to remember that it's a terrible case, but it's crimes like that happen to the undocumented versus the other way around.
Yeah, no, that's right, and just how they're treated at work as well. I mean, we had the last episode of Fight Back Radio. We had Professor Masao Suzuki on, who talked about the economics and the economy with Trump. But he's an activist in immigrant rights in San Jose, and he also mentioned that the amount of the super exploitation that undocumented workers face in the food industry, in the fields, and that the pay is often very low and the work is very, very difficult. So it's it's likely, according to the professor, it's likely to increase inflation, especially for food and groceries and things like that, which Trump, said he was going to lower. So we'll see how that works out, I guess. But I wanted to ask you also about, who's actually coming to this country undocumented right now too? Because I mean, there's a stereotype that they're all Mexicans, and you mentioned earlier about natural disasters in countries and political instability in Central America. There's also Guatemala, Honduras, Haiti. But also, I know in Chicago there's been a lot of immigrants from Venezuela where there's been harsh U.S. sanctions that has hurt the economy there as well. And so, could you talk a little bit about, what the undocumented workforce in the United States looks like and who these people actually are?
A lot of people do think that it's Mexicanos who are coming over to the States, right? There is still a large portion of Mexicanos coming to the States in an undocumented manner. But we've seen an increase in recent years from Central America in particular, especially Guatemala. And so, there's a number of reasons for that, especially with what the U.S. did in Central America in the 80s. And so, that has completely destabilized what's happening there. And so people are still coming over. What you said about Venezuela is also very true. There's an uptick in folks from Venezuela coming over, and that has a lot to do with the U.S. Has done in particular there with sanctions and embargoes on Venezuela, tariffs, and also on their exports and the way that they can have their economy thrive. And so there was a series of buses that were coming from the state of Texas. And I know that your city got a bunch of those buses of undocumented Venezuelans. And a big shout out to the organization Chirla, who received every single one of those buses in LA and made it so they were able to have resources, a place to stay, food, and in a lot of ways, education and fun things for the youth. And so, that's just another way that Texas is like completely washing their hands of dealing with the problem. It's a huge state, and yet they just wheel people out of this state and ask for other places that are our sanctuary cities to take care of their problem, which just goes to show you that we definitely will stand and unite around the undocumented when bigots like Governor Abbott are just ready to cart them off somewhere else.
I also wanted to ask about, I mean, there's been, this, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but this question of drugs. We had Bill Conroy, who's an investigative journalist on Fight Back Radio, and he spoke about the fact that, guns are being sent in big numbers to Mexico, and that's part of the problem with the cartels is that there's such an endless supply of guns, even though they're illegal in Mexico, that are going across the border. Well, drugs are coming this way. And I know that there's a new president in Mexico, and we're going to have a new president in the United States. How do you think that's, what's your trajectory for this, and what can we do as activists? What should we be calling for in terms of trying to, U.S.-Mexico relations?
Yes, Claudia Sheinbaum. She's the first woman who's ever been elected to be a president of Mexico, even before the U.S. did, right? So Mexico is on a it's on a winning streak. It abolished slavery before the U.S. did, and now it's won a woman president before the U.S. So Claudia Sheinbaum is awesome. She's also stood on the correct side of Palestine. But so far she hasn't said too much about the deportations, ways that she's going to try to ensure that things are better for people who are on this side of the border, or if they're deported, what she can do to combat that. So hoping to see that there's a little bit of a firmer position from her on that one. But in regards to this like trafficking thing with drugs and guns, it's always used as an excuse, right? On making it impossible to have regular people who are just seeking asylum or refugee status. It makes their lives harder, right? And so the big time criminals, I think in many ways end up, collaborating with the U.S. in some ways. I don't know. I don't know too much about that, but I definitely know that the way that it trickles down is that folks who are trying to come over in a permitted way, it just becomes impossible for them. And so, I think the whole weapons thing, it's not going to be, children in caravans who are trying to come to the States that are going to be carting around these enormous guns that are, used as excuses of why we should be harder on the undocumented.
Yeah, yeah. I want to circle back to this question of racism in in how the U.S. Looks at immigration as well. I know, Trump, recently, he talked about tariffs on Mexico and Canada as well, and relating to people coming across the border. And I'm not sure that they're going to treat Mexico and Canada the same by any stretch, but also. But I read something in the paper just the other day in the United States, or not in the United States, in Chicago, just in the city of Chicago, the undocumented workers, there's about 38,000 Ukrainian immigrants who came here, because of the war between Russia and the proxy war between Russia and NATO Ukraine, and it's I'm skeptical about that Trump's going to be as much of a hard ass on the Ukrainians or the Canadians as he is on Mexicans and Haitians and people like that. And I was wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yes, Richard, thank you so much. I didn't mean to raise my hand. I know it's just us. So I'm really glad that you bring up the Ukrainian situation as a way that the U.S. is a hypocrite in how they treat refugees and undocumented people. The U.S. is quick to label the refugees of Ukraine as refugees, right? When of course they're white European folk, right? But that would never be the same case, and will not be, and has not been the same case for people who are immigrating or trying to seek refugee and asylum status in the States from places like Haiti, where there is a very real political instability caused by the U.S. And so, yeah, I don't think that that's going to change. And it just goes to show you that they roll out the red carpet for certain immigrants, especially if you're from places like Ukraine, or I would say that it's a very similar situation if you're a Cuban immigrant. People who leave a place like Cuba, where there's socialism, and for a very long time, the U.S. has seen that as not a way that they want folks to be thriving, right? And it is very easy to become a U.S. citizen once you're deemed and win refugee status as a Cuban. And I do believe that's a similar situation that's happening for Ukrainians.
Yeah, no, it's. I think you're right. I want to go back to your organization, the Centro CSO Community Service Organization in Los Angeles, and talk a little bit about what your plans are going forward. Especially in light of the fact that now Trump's president, he's made. All these threats. I'm sure it's difficult because he's every day. It's another crazy thing, and some of it. He's a liar, so some of it's just bluster, but not all of it is. And he's done some horrific things to not just to immigrants, but to workers of different types. And so, could you talk a little bit about the Central CSO and what your plans are for 2025?
Yes, absolutely. So, hopefully you can hear me okay, Richard. I'm walking over to my other child's daycare. But yes, CSO is expanding and it's moving forward and trying to protect the folks who are undocumented, right? Know Your Rights trainings are supposed to be continuing. And as we said, when this airs, our call-in date to have Biden extend TPS for 18 months will be over. But there's going to be similar actions like those because CSO has been an organization since 1947 that has fought for Chicano rights and immigrant rights. We are going to be continuing with that, and there's actually CSO chapters that are popping up in other places. Orange County is one where there's a nicely established CSO chapter, and we also are hearing that there's other chapters that might be in the works that are going to be starting up immigrants' rights work. We heard that there might be a chapter in Napa Valley, and there might be CSO chapters. If you're in the Southwest, as we call it, we would love to make connection with you and start talking about that. The CSO in LA phone number, where you can text us or ask us how you can start your own chapter, I'm going to say that out loud. It's 323-484-8630. Or you can contact CSO on any of the social medias. We have Instagram, TikTok, and a couple of other things. But yeah, just reach out and see if you want to make it happen in your city.
Yeah, no, that's great. We'll put that in the show notes as well, so people can scroll down and look for it there as well. But yeah, thank you for that. And then also, I wanted to ask you about the network that CSO is a part of, that you're a co-chair of, the Legalization for All. So what are the plans for legalization for all as we go forward into the Trump administration, the Trump's second term?
Yes, Richard. So similar to CSO, a lot of what the Legalization for All network is doing is calls to action around the country. So calls like protecting TPS, know your rights trainings around the country. But one thing that we're going to buckle down on is rapid responses to deportations. That is something that we think is going to increase, like we talked about already on this call. And so we want folks to be prepared and trained, and that there be some kind of network established of people who are ready to take action in case deportations do come down. And so, if you want to get informed on how to do that, just reach out to us in the Legalization for All network and find out how you can make it so that your city, your town, and the folks around you are also well protected.
Yeah, no, that's good. And so what can you talk a little bit about what that looks like? I mean, what are we going to be? I mean, if there's deportation orders for individuals or whatever, it's we're going to be doing blockades, or I don't know. I mean, what's is this a question of legal action, or trying to figure out how to pool resources for lawyers and such, because obviously legal stuff can be expensive. What does that look like exactly?
Yeah. What you talked about is actually a lot of what we were planning on doing. So making it so that there's an immediate action, so like a protest of some sort, and what you said, like blocking down a house, making it so that an employer can't have the vehicles leave that facility. Yes, we're talking about direct action so that our folks know in our communities that we will stand by their side, and building a network of folks who are ready to do that kind of work. So absolutely, we're talking about that kind of stuff. We're also talking about having connections with attorneys who would want to do this kind of work. We know that they're inundated with cases, of course, but if we can get some basic know your rights, if the warrants for the deportation removals are not signed correctly, then they're invalid, and so we just want people to be well educated on that, so that if they find out that there's an ICE raid happening, we can take action and make sure that they stay home where they belong.
So I know, the Central CSO has historically been a protest organization that, amongst other things, and that, I mean, a lot of what you've spoken about here are like things of know your rights and protect yourself, and clearly things that are important. Do you see this as a transition period where there's less protests going on under Trump, and we need to do more of this other kind of know your rights kind of stuff, or how do you see the next period?
Yeah, no, I do think it's going to be a lot of protesting that's going to happen still. I do think, however, that you're right, Richard. There is going to be a little bit of a shift on doing more trainings of knowing your rights, of acting out scenarios on what to do if ICE comes to your house, or if a local official who's not ICE, like a police officer, shows up at your door and wants to come in and is questioning you and your family about someone's immigration status. That's the kind of stuff we need to let people know, that they don't have to answer those questions, especially in a sanctuary city like LA. That's something that, the local government will be on your side under. So, just we are going to have to do a lot more of that kind of work in our local places.
So, unfortunately, Sol, we're winding down here a little bit, and I can see you're busy too. You're walking off with one kid to pick up another. So we definitely appreciate your very precious time. But But is there anything else you want to add before we sign off?
Yeah, just thank you to all the people who are very much interested in fighting back for the undocumented. Reach out to Legalization for All if you're really actually serious about starting your own chapter. We will get right back to you and make it happen. And so, not one more deportation, and hopefully we can win legalization for all.
So we have a special treat for you today as part of our outro for this episode on immigration. I have with me Louise Carhart, who's an attorney for Legal Aid Chicago. She practices immigration laws as well as labor law. And I know particularly, Louise, you've been involved with farm workers in southern Illinois, or downstate, which is probably the entire state outside of Chicago. But I wanted to ask you, just as, and thank you for joining us, first off, for being part of this episode about Trump and immigration on Fight Back Radio.
I'm excited to be here. Thanks for asking me back. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And by the way, yes, Louise was a previous guest on Fight Back Radio where she talked about her contract campaign at Legal Aid Chicago with United Auto Workers, where since then she's been elected as the chief steward for that bargaining unit. So congratulations on that as well. Yes, absolutely. So let's talk about immigration, though. So what are the concerns that you have as an immigration attorney for farm workers here in Illinois? What are the concerns you have with the Trump presidency? What are the things that we should be worried about and be prepared to fight back about?
Yeah, I think there's two sides of my work that I do. There's the immigration, like deportation defense, advocacy side in front of immigration court. And then I also do labor enforcement, like a legal services point of view, I don't work for the government. And I think something that we saw during the first Trump presidency, I was a paralegal during the first Trump presidency, and I did deportation defense, was you would see people being reported to the courts, at a much higher rate because much lower consequence crimes all of a sudden qualified you to be in immigration proceedings. So you had people who had DUIs, who had simple traffic violations, and all of a sudden they were being referred to the immigration court, and that had never, it had happened, but it was at much higher levels. The courts were overwhelmed. Chicago actually has the longest wait time in the United States in terms of a final decision from the immigration court. It takes about 5 to 6 years on average in Chicago.
Does this, let me ask you, I'm sorry to interrupt, but does this sanctuary thing affect this? Because a lot of times you're pulled over for a DUI by a county sheriff or a city police officer, and if they're not cooperating with Homeland Security and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, it seems to me that then you might be able to skate by. But if you're in a state like Texas or Florida or wherever, that that you would be in more trouble.
Yeah, that's definitely a huge factor. I think here we're in Illinois, we're in Chicago. Chicago is a sanctuary city, but that depends on who's the mayor. That depends on who's the attorney general, how they view what a sanctuary city doesn't have like a legal definition. So it's tenuous. And we're also, because we are the biggest immigration court in the Midwest, we get people from Wisconsin, from Indiana, and they are not sanctuary cities. So they refer people, and they all come through the Chicago Immigration Court. And I know I'm being very specific to Chicago right now, but I think something else that people are anticipating, or the community is anticipating, is that we are that higher concentration of criminal referrals. And during Biden, what we've seen is an influx of migrants, mainly from Venezuela, and what was different from what was different that Biden did from Trump and Obama was they were letting people into the country, but immediately putting them into immigration proceedings. So even with the lower rates of criminal referrals, there was still an increase in the immigration court proceedings and just individual cases, because they were letting these people in and immediately putting them into proceedings.
So it seemed like there was less people crossing the border illegally, but people would get these temporary.
It's called being paroled in. So they would be, basically, you get let into the country, you don't have status. Many of them were reporting to ICE monthly, or they had ankle monitors on. And then a lot of them were in immigration proceedings as well. And that that has pushed, like, it's overwhelmed the immigration courts during the Biden years. And then moving into the Trump years, these criminal referrals will also further overwhelm the courts. And, we're getting final hearing dates for 2026, 2027, and they're going to start going into 2028 pretty soon. So you just have a huge amount of people who have come in during the Biden years who haven't even had their first court date. You're going to have a lot more criminal referrals. People who were lower on the priority list for Biden are going to be at the top for Trump. And people are going to lose protections that they had previously. Because I work with farm workers. I should say, I'm speaking as myself. These are my opinions and everything's based on my experience. It's not my job, but I work with advocates who work with trafficking survivors. And the majority of trafficking in the United States is labor-based. And during the Biden years in 2022, they passed a law called Deferred Action for Labor Enforcement. And this allowed people to get a work permit, while there was an ongoing labor case. So someone who was undocumented and experienced wage theft at work or was trafficked for the labor market, they could all of a sudden get a work permit and work here legally and not be at risk of deportation while their labor case was ongoing. And these labor cases go on forever. The work permit's for 4 years. And that was a big win during the Biden years. And advocates in the farm worker community, in the low-wage worker community are saying, day one, we're going to see that's going to be axed. And it's really too bad, because I work with people who are here working on farms on temporary visas, and it is so hard to get people to report exploitative practices. Sorry. It's so hard when people are relying on this income. They're sending it home. They don't know how they're going to find another job in the United States to get a temporary work visa. But they are really suffering. They are living in substandard conditions. They are not being paid correctly. They are being overworked. They are being driven across state lines without their knowledge. And it's just a horribly exploitive program. But this deferred action allowed them to report these violations. It increased enforcement with the DOL, and they got a work permit.
The Department of Labor.
The Department of Labor. That's a whole subset of people that will be losing those protections, unfortunately.
Yeah, part of there's also a concern that, Trump has called for mass deportations using the military, all kinds of other things. And, when we were talking to Marisol, she was saying that right now we're pushing the Biden administration, the legalization for all network, to extend these temporary visas for 18 months, which he can do before he leaves office, because a lot of this is executive order kinds of things. But also because a lot of it's executive order, when 18 months expires, or even some of the other stuff, it seems that Trump can pull these back and start deporting people. Is that a concern that we have?
Yeah, I think something that makes immigration so unique is that it is under the unique purview of the executive branch. It's not, the Supreme Court is very deferential to the executive branch. Congress, if they want to change something with immigration, they have to go through comprehensive immigration reform, which is something that we haven't had in this country since 1986. So immigration, because it is under the executive branch, the Department of Homeland Security is almost entirely, controlled by what the presidential administration wants. It makes it very hard to make things stick. And it makes it very hard to have any kind of stability in the legal landscape, because we have such polarizing elections where priorities go back and forth. And especially with Trump, when I was working under his administration, we would come in to work and he had changed something, and every one of my clients had some effect based on that. So overnight things would change, and all of a sudden you're having to contact hundreds of clients and say, this happened last night. This is what it means for your case. We need to, X, Y, and Z. And the past 4 years have been, I don't want to say that Biden was great for immigration. I do think there were some wins that we got. I do think, I'm always grateful for when things don't change overnight. But I work with a lot of people who have never practiced under Trump, and it is just a different, it's a different beast, and you have to be a lot more reflexive and reactive. And I think it's going to take also a lot of public support and a lot of public mobilization in terms of, protesting against certain practices, because we didn't see that during the Biden administration. We haven't seen protests during the Biden administration that really focused around immigration, despite the fact that he had, more deportations than Trump did, despite the fact that, we made some gains, but we didn't make a lot of gains. We saw a lot of the practices that happened under Trump continuing under Biden, but that lack of public outcry and awareness really slowed down the rate of progression.
Well, let me ask you about that. So, it seems to me there's lots of factors that are, going to play into this, and it's hard to read it because some of it, Trump is, whatever, he says he's going to do this and that, and sometimes he does, sometimes he doesn't, and then there's things that he might do that he hasn't said at all. But it seems to me, and we had Masao Suzuki on here in our previous episode. He talked about the inflationary aspects and how much money it would cost. I know you're working with farm workers, and he mentioned there's not like a huge section of the U.S. citizens that want to do farm work, especially the harder picking types of things where you're sometimes exposed to pesticides and the laws are broken, as you said. And but there are people making uber money off of this too. And so these are people that, are expecting exemptions from Trump, rich people, not the farm workers themselves, but it could affect them. So there's those type of things. But then there's also the protests. I mean, I know there's protests around the country, including here in Chicago. We'll be at the Federal Plaza at 11 o'clock for those of you that are in Chicago on January 20th. And that's Martin Luther King's birthday. So we're going to celebrate Martin Luther King by protesting Trump's inauguration, because he gets inaugurated on the same day. But that's fortunate for us, especially public employees and students and others won't be in school or at work on that day. But my question is, does this kind of thing help? Does the protests, in your view, how should do you encourage people to go to January 20th?
Yeah, I think this is all of these topics are really complicated. Immigration law, and especially, is very complicated and convoluted. There's a lot going on, and I think something that was good that came out of the Trump years, where people were being educated about how do people get into immigration court proceedings, what does it mean to be on a visa versus a green card versus a citizen, what are all of these differences? And, showing up to programs like this gets you connected with people. And those connections help you learn. They point you towards resources, but they also, bring awareness to these issues if you are already, super plugged in. I think it's really important to be making as many connections as possible. That's something that even during Biden and at the protests that I've been to during the Biden administration, having those connections, meeting with people, being pointed to more resources has really opened up the amount of influence that I can have.
Absolutely.
Personally, I've seen that change for myself. And I think if you're looking to get plugged in, the simplest thing you can do is show up at a protest and write down the names of people that you hear from, write down the organizations that you see represented there. And just make note of who is showing up, who is consistently there for the causes that you care about.
Yeah. So, let me encourage all our Fight Back Radio listeners to come January 20th to the protest in the city near you, and bring some of your friends with you. I know your union at Legal Aid Chicago, the UAW, has endorsed the protest here in Chicago. So that's good. And I also, before we sign off, I want to give a plug to, I know Louise will be speaking on a panel at the Uri Eichen Gallery, which is reopening. And so that'll be January 10th. At 6 o'clock, the doors are going to open and the program will start around 7. But the gallery also is going to feature art from the Pilsen iconic artist John Pittman Weber. And so, but the panel is going to talk about immigration. So if you're free and you're in Chicago, the Uri Eichen Gallery on 21st and Halsted. So come out to that. And of course, protest on January 20th, honor Dr. King. And, we need to, we'll be protesting for 4 years. There's going to be a lot of this. And so I hope to see a lot of you in the streets. Finally, I want to encourage everybody to, plug Fight Back Radio. We're, we get the word out by you telling other people that we exist. If you like this episode, if you got something out of it, tell others. We're going to put in the show notes how to get a hold of legalization for all and the Centro Community Service Organization, or Centro CSO, which Marisol talked about. And finally, before we sign off, I want to give a shout out to our fabulous production team of Shane Tremley, Vince Olson, Dodd McColgan, and Natalie Pranis. And I'm Richard Berg for the entire Fight Back Radio team, saying until next time, all power to the people.